At 6:42 p.m., the only thing my family brought to my grand opening was a text. If you wanted a postmortem, you should have shown up for the first slice. The family table I'd set, hand-lettered placard, 2 marigolds trying their best, never heard a single chair scrape. The bell above my door kept clearing its throat to an empty room, while my sister's rooftop promotion party marched across my feed in champagne loops and a neon promise. We show up. I'm Nora Bennett, 33. 3 weeks ago, I turned the key to Harbor and Hearth in Savannah's Starland district, where Spanish moss combs the wind and butter browns faster because the air is honest about being humid. Opening day smelled like vanilla, rain waiting offshore, and a little fear. Deshaun, our mail carrier, slid a padded envelope onto the counter and didn't look toward the empty corner. "Big night?" he asked. "For someone," I said, smoothing a crumb that wasn't there. He left 2 stamps anyway. The right kind of silence. The cooler hummed like a steady note. The espresso wand sighed the way friends do when they've run out of advice. Brown butter steam laced the room and clung to my sweater. Sugar made the air warm enough to believe. Under the register, a white edge of paper peered out. Mr. Whitaker's rent reminder clipped to utilities, a paper choir all singing the same date. Outside, tires whispered on wet asphalt. Inside, one last cinnamon roll breathed sweet into the quiet like a candle refusing to go out. Brooke posted a boomerang of confetti cannons. The caption read, "The team that shows up." I double-tapped by accident and stared at the heart like it belonged to a stranger who borrowed my thumbprint. Theo from Riverlight Books leaned in, rain freckles dotting his lenses. "Return the pie plate now, or should I pretend I found it later?" "Now's fine," I said. He lifted the plate like a white flag. "It's clean." He meant, "I see you." I wiped a perfectly clean spot and pretended the streak mattered. The bell coughed again, hopeful and a little embarrassed. I had set the family table where the light is kind. Corner window, soft shadows. The good plates I'd saved for once-in-a-lifetime days. I'd pictured my mother tapping the rim to test its thickness. My father aligning the placard so it faced the room, Brooke pretending not to cry while secretly loving the macarons named after her. Instead, their evening arrived as a carousel of filtered gold, rooftop speeches I could hear without sound. Proud and muebles. Proud, proud. Before I tell you how the day I baked, toured for 10 years, turned into a masterclass in feeling invisible, tell me where you're watching from. If you've ever set a place for people who taught you the word family and watched that place stay empty, hit subscribe so you don't have to stand here alone. Dad's text glowed again on my screen. 5 brisk words, no punctuation, and somehow a verdict. I flipped the sign to closed but left the window lamps on. From the sidewalk, the bakery looked like a small ship moored in a storm it refuses to call a storm. "We need to discuss the bakery," he'd written. Of course we did. We just didn't do it at the family table. I locked up with the window lamp still on and walked home under palms that shook off rain like dogs. On my kitchen table, I laid out our family's artifacts like evidence: Dad's brass Litigator of the Year plaque, the graduation pen he gifts, Mom's hospital badge that smells faintly of antiseptic, Grant's laminated spreadsheet from a holiday, budget talk, Brooke's brand deck with optics circled 3 times. Together, they told a story I knew too well. Alma's rolling pin leaned against the backsplash. When I lifted it, flower ghosts rose, and the apartment smelled of browned butter and citrus peel. "Listen for the hush," she used to say, tapping the pan. "When the sizzle goes quiet, the butter is ready to tell the truth." Her hands guided mine again. Dough thumped, a pinch of salt for honesty. My phone blinked with a DM from my cousin Lee. "Hey, love you. Aunt Ev said tonight was complicated, corporate folks in town, big optics. She thought you'd prefer space so you wouldn't feel compared." Rain check? The words were polite and olive drab. I could picture the committee meeting they came from. I typed, erased, typed again. "Space is what I have," I sent. 3 dots pulsed, then disappeared. I brewed tea to quiet the caffeine tremor and opened Alma's notebook to a page stained with butter. The kettle clicked softly, stubborn, like a heartbeat refusing pity. In her slanted script, feed the neighborhood first. Family is a word, neighbors are verbs. I traced the line and felt something ache that wasn't exactly in my chest. When the kettle clicked off, I called Mom. She answered on the second ring, voice efficient enough to make me sit up. "Everything go smoothly?" she asked. "The marigolds held up," I said. Deshawn brought stamps. Theo returned a pie plate he didn't have to return. "That's nice," she said, which is how we label anything that won't pad a resume. Papers shuffled. "We'll talk soon. Your father has thoughts." "I assumed," I said, and let that be the whole argument. Outside, rain rinsed the streets and left them shining like fresh icing. I set the rolling pin across Alma's notebook and sat on the floor back to the cabinets. Memory cued a reel I didn't ask for. 8-year-old me on a milk crate beside her, sugar snapping in cast iron, Alma whispering, "You don't have to be louder than them. Just make something they can taste." My phone buzzed again. Group chat, family, a photo from Brooke's rooftop, the neon way show up glowing behind them. Dad's comment, "Proud of this team." Grant added a graph emoji. Mom liked the photo, but not the message I'd sent. I watched the bubbles of a conversation I wasn't in, and I washed the teacup long after it was clean. The apartment smelled like citrus and something starting to burn. Alma would have turned off the heat and opened a window. I switched off every light except the over-the-sink bulb and made a short list on the back of a receipt. Dawn, reorder, flour, call Whitaker. Bake anyway. When I slept, I dreamed of a table with a placard that read, "Family." But the chairs were filled by people whose names I learned one by one, over coffee rings and crumbs. 10 days out, I taped a paper calendar to the cooler and drew a fat circle around Saturday. Every box between read, like a recipe. Order flour, test the bourbon pecan tart, hand letter menu cards. I printed invitations on thick cream stock, gold foil edges that caught the kitchen light. I wrote a line to each person who had ever corrected my posture or borrowed my sweater. "Come see what I've been kneading toward." Lila from Moss and Moon walked in, carrying stems wrapped in brown paper. "Marigolds say persistence," she said, trimming them at the sink. "They're scrappy, like you." Theo from Riverlight leaned on the door jamb with a box of used novels. "Trade you these for cinnamon knots on consignment," he grinned. 7 days out, Mom called during her coffee round. "Your father's calendar is a zoo next weekend," she said, voice in administrator mode. "Any chance a soft opening Friday would be smarter optics?" The word landed like a cold spoon. "I'm not blending into a rehearsal," I said. "This is the day." Papers rustled. "We'll try," she replied, which is how she says no without saying no. Brooke dropped a link in the family group chat. A rooftop venue, RSVP tracker humming. "Senior brand director, can you believe?" she wrote. Grant responded with a champagne emoji. Dad wrote, "CEO flying in. Would be good optics to have the family there." No one typed the obvious conflict. The chat moved like a river around a rock. 6 days out, Mr. Whitaker stopped by in a windbreaker. "Just confirming signage meets code," he said, eyes sliding toward the register. "You'll want a strong first month." "Same," I said, tapping the lease. He tucked his card closer. "Paper rules eat sentiment for breakfast." I named pastries after seasons and places instead of people. Riverwalk rye, Starland morning buns, Alma's song. Alma wouldn't have minded a namesake. She would have laughed and told me to salt the glaze until it tasted true. I taped a sign over the corner table, "Family," because faith sometimes looks like letters inked before the sentence is written. 3 days out, Tessa from the Chronicle called. "Can I swing by for a quick photo?" "It'll be drywall dust and optimism," I said. "Perfect," she answered. Naomi arrived with a camera that clicked like punctuation. "Hold that," she said as I scraped vanilla bean into cream. "Your hands are telling the whole story." I blushed, and the cream bloomed specks like a night sky. 2 days out. A box of branded balloons arrived at my apartment by mistake. Brooke Bennett, we show up. I sat on the floor and cut the tape slow. I sealed the box again and left it by the door. Some packages aren't mine to return. The night before, I walked the block at blue hour. Windows glowed, the neighborhood exhaled dinner and dish soap. I laid a cinnamon roll and a thank you note on Theo's counter, slipped marigolds through Lila's mail slot, texted Marcus about a trial order if all went well. "Proud of you," he answered chef short. Back home, I posted a photo of the corner table, empty but set. "Tomorrow." The caption read, "Mom liked the picture." 2 minutes later, Brooke's party account posted a boomerang of confetti tonight. The comment underneath from Dad was crisp as a check mark. We show up. I placed Alma's rolling pin across the calendar like a brace and set my alarm for 3:30 a.m. The countdown was over. The story, apparently, was not. Some storms send a warning. This one wrote it in gold and called it Love Anyway. By 3:32 a.m., the oven's pilot star was the only thing awake on Bull Street. I whisked eggs until the yolks ribboned, listened for Alma's hush in the pan, and leaned my forearms against cool marble whenever the steam chased the night out of the room. Brown butter smelled like toast and walnuts. Vanilla stuck to my sleeves. The bell over the door tested its spring once, expectant, as if it too had set an alarm. At 9 on the nose, I flipped the sign. The first footsteps were the soft ones you hope for. Lila, with a bucket of marigolds, Theo carrying a stack of dog-eared paperbacks for the swap shelf, Deshaun off route with 2 coffee stamps and his rumor that we'd trend before lunch. He tried a morning bun, closed his eyes, and nodded like a good verdict. "That's church," he said. A couple from the neighborhood split a Riverwalk rye and argued sweetly about which side had more seeds. Kim, still in scrubs from the night shift, ordered 3 hand pies and whispered, "For the nurse's station, but I'm the nurse who'll forget to share." Their grins matched mine. At 10, Tessa slid in with Naomi and a camera that blinked like a polite firefly. Naomi caught me lifting a tray and said, "Can you hold there?" Tessa asked, "What do you hope people feel when they walk in?" I glanced at the corner table. Placard, marigolds, the good plates. "Like the room has been saving them a seat," I said. She looked where I looked and didn't write that down. She didn't need to. The bell kept time. The espresso machine learned names and sang them in steam. Still, by noon, the street heat pressed its palm against the glass, and the lull arrived the way all restaurants know, a slow quiet, the hum of compressor and breath. No family, no on my way, no proud of you. Brooke's party account posted a sweeping pan of a rooftop buffet captioned, "We show up," so big the letters looked like scaffolding. Dad commented 3 tiny words, "Proud of this." I put the phone down between the sugar caddies. Theo perched on a stool with a paperback and said, not looking up, "You know that thing where people arrive late and pretend it was the plan?" "I know the thing," I said, cutting a tart into 6 exact pieces. "Maybe that thing is still on the table." I followed his glance to the corner. It was beautifully empty. A family of 4 came in, sweaty and apologetic, and left powdered sugar fingerprints that were honestly perfect. A student asked if I'd consider a punch card. I said I'd consider remembering her name instead. She laughed and promised to make that hard. At 2:15, the Chronicle posted 3 photos from Naomi. My hands flour-dusted, a star of morning buns, the sign in the window catching a square of sun. The caption read, "Harbor and Hearth opens in Starland. Smells like a story." 5 minutes later, we felt it. A trickle that might become a stream. People arrived with the tone of folks who want to be early to something small. I refilled the water carafe at the corner table without thinking and paused at how cold the glass felt in my palm. The marigolds had slumped and then decided not to. When I turned back to the counter, a plain craft envelope rested under the napkin holder. No name, just wait. I looked up. The door eased shut on a sliver of afternoon, and the bell said, very softly, yes. The envelope weighed more than paper. Inside, a cashier's check for enough to hush the flour invoice, and a note for the flour bill. Keep going. No name. The ink had a tremor that belongs to courage. Morning came, watery and gray. I was refilling the pastry case when the bell chimed once, twice, then in a rhythm like a gavel. My family filed in like a board committee. Dad in courtroom navy, Mom with a folder, Grant with a tablet, Brooke in sunglasses. They chose the biggest table. We need to discuss the bakery, Dad said, smoothing papers. Market fundamentals aren't on your side. We've prepared options. I open in 20 minutes, I said, setting tongs on parchment. If you're here to buy a scone, almond, or pear, Brooke lifted a hand. This doesn't have to be adversarial. My company has an entry-level brand coordinator role. You're creative. You could build a portfolio without all this risk. She gestured at the room. Mom slid a small stack across. Administrative fellowship applications. You've always been organized. Hospital leadership is a solid path. Grant angled his tablet, projections swimming red. At current run rate, you're insolvent in 4 to 6 months. Cut quality to extend runway, and you accelerate failure. Best salvage is exiting the lease now. Dad has a broker. Dad tapped listing agreements filled out. I slid the rent reminder beneath his pen, then laid the anonymous cashier's check on top, paperweight over paper thread. Nora, you missed the ribbon. You don't get the scissors. Dad, charity is not a strategy. Nora, it's not charity, it's a vote. And the neighborhood already counted. Theo appeared in the doorway, read the air, and retreated with a 2-finger salute that said, "Call me if you need a witness." A stranger covered my flour. The Chronicle ran a piece. Customers showed up at opening and again at closing. I said, "Hobbies don't clock in at 3:30 a.m. This room pays rent in receipts and names." Brooke's phone lit with a rooftop photo. She silenced it, then looked up as if remembering she had a sister. "I still don't speak this language, but that line out the door says you're fluent." I placed my phone face up, a screenshot of the family chat with Dad's line about CEOs flying in, good optics to have the family there, and beside it, Cousin Lee's DM. Aunt Ev said you'd prefer space so you wouldn't feel compared. Rain check, Mom's eyes tightened a 1/4 inch. Context can be unkind. So can curation, I said. You chose a story and cast me as conflict. Grant shifted. We're not villains. We're data. Your family, I said. Messier. Dad pushed a pen toward me. Sign. Nora. I didn't touch it. No. The word sat down and didn't apologize. Grant closed his tablet with the neat finality of a spreadsheet balancing to 0. A man in a postal uniform stepped in, rein still on his shoulders. He read the table, said nothing, and pinned a card on the wall. For the one cleaning up after this. The bell did the thank you for me. Mom gathered the forms into a careful stack. When you're ready to be practical, call me. I'm being practical, I said. I'm feeding the neighborhood. Brooke stood, sunglasses back on. Offer stands, she said, meaning the job, meaning her version of safety. Dad left the pen. Clock's ticking, he said. They filed out the way they came in. I slid the check into its envelope and tucked it under the register where courage lives between paper and proof. The bell settled, then rang more. Someone real, someone hungry, someone who didn't need me to sign away the room to taste that it was alive. The morning after the committee visit, the bakery felt like a stage after the curtain falls. Lights on, no voice. I set the mixer to stubborn and let the dough argue my mood into something that could rise. Dough rose obediently, scored loaves opened like rehearsed smiles, and the case looked perfect. People bought things and thanked me. They left with polite mouths. After that, the floor found a new tilt, and we all had to learn a new way to stand. Flavor is a conversation. Mine had gone flat. Lila noticed first. She set marigolds in a glass and watched me ice a lemon sheet. You're nailing the lines, she said, but your voice is somewhere else. Deshawn whistled softer than usual. Kim, hair in a messy knot. took a bite of a hand pie, and smiled like someone holding back a critique. I smiled back as if I couldn't taste the missing note. By afternoon, I was producing pastries the way printers make flyers: sharp, legible, a little soulless. My hands knew technique too well, which meant they succeeded me into silence. When the lull came, I shut off the lamps and took Alma's notebook from the drawer. The elastic had lost its stretch. Butter freckles dotted the margin. A folded page crackled free, my name in her quick, narrowing script: Nora, for the day you forget how to hear. I stood at the prep sink to read. The room smelled of cinnamon and bleach. "Sweet girl," it began. "Your family speaks in trophies and calendars. You speak in crumbs left on plates, and in the way coffee gets refilled without asking. You won't match their measures. You don't have to, but you must measure or the bread won't rise." She couldn't resist a scale joke. "When butter sings, listen for the beat between the notes. There's your salt," she wrote. "Salt tells the truth. Add a pinch when you'd rather add sugar. People can taste pretending. In the margin, brown the butter longer than you think. Stop when the hiss goes quiet, not when the color looks pretty. Below that, feed the ones who show up, and leave the door cracked for the ones still learning how." I read it twice until the clean feeling thinned. I washed my hands and started again. I browned the butter until the specks went chestnut and the pan hushed. I salted the glaze until it made sense. I leaned over the mixer and let the perfume of toasted milk and sugar move past my head and into my ribs. When the bell rang, I kept the lights low and handed the first new batch to the person who walked in. Theo, returning a book no one had asked for. He bit, blinked, and looked at me like a witness when testimony finally lands. "There you are," he said. I taped a craft sheet above the community shelf and wrote in marker, "Pay it forward. Stick a prepaid slice here for someone who needs a good day." I pinned the anonymous check stub beneath it as the first card. The wall looked flimsy and brave, which felt right. When I flipped the lamps back on, the bakery was itself again. Not louder, honest. I texted Marcus a photo and one line, testing something. He replied in abbreviations that sounded like applause. Tomorrow I'd call landlord, the Chronicle, and flour supplier again. Tonight I swept, left the window lamps on, and locked the door that refuses to lock people out. The pay it forward wall looked fragile at first. One craft sheet, one clipped stub, a wandering marker line. By noon, it had freckles of generosity. Deshawn taped up "coffee plus not" for any nurse off the night shift. A tourist couple scribbled "Welcome to Savannah" with a tiny shrimp. A kid in a Braves cap bought one cookie for a person having a day. People paused longer at that wall than at the case, reading like a bulletin board, "For the heart." When Kim arrived, eyes half-mooned from a graveyard shift, she redeemed the nurse card, took a bite, and pinned up another for the next tired one. The bell kept time while the espresso hissed names, and the wall grew one thumbtack at a time. At 11, Tessa posted the Chronicle piece with 3 photos by Naomi. My flour-dusted hands, a tray of morning buns mid-glow, and the wall with its first row of cards. The headline read, "Harbor and Hearth opens with a neighbor-first recipe." Comments came quick and kind. A pastor tagged his group. A teacher asked about field trips. Someone wrote, "This is what my block needed," which I read twice. The door opened on that sentence. 2 teens pointed at the wall and bought kindness before sugar. Just after lunch, Marcus walked in, wearing a ball cap and his chef's face, the one that measures without seeming to. He tore a heel from a Riverwalk rye, ate it dry, and nodded. "Crumb's honest," he said. "We've been hunting a bakery partner for Bay and Vine." He set a list on the counter: Pullman loaves, burger buns, a fruit dessert rotation. "Small to start. We test this weekend. Deliver by 6, labeled and dated." He tapped the list. "You'll need consistency. Can you stretch?" "Stretching is half my day," I said. He smiled. "Good. Then let's try it. We shook hands, brief, flower on knuckles, a promise standing for a contract. Scaling is a new language. So I learned to count backward from dawn. Mix by 2, proof by 3, bake by 4, load by 5. I printed labels, bought dating tape, lined Cambros like soldiers. The kitchen smelled sturdy, yeast and heat instead of nerves. When the mixer groaned, I let it, then rested my palm on its shoulder the way you tell a horse you're listening. Theo promised a wagon and a ridiculous headlamp because friendship wears whatever gets the job done, even at 4 a.m., especially then, always. Around 3, Mr. Whitaker appeared. He studied the line at the door, the cards on the wall, the trays breathing cinnamon. Signage still looks good, he said, which in landlord meant I see the crowd. He hovered by the cooler. Your lease has an hours clause. If demand holds, we can discuss an amendment. Not praise, just a hinge loosening. I'll keep you posted, I said. He tucked his card deeper like a handshake he wasn't ready to finish and pretended to admire the floor tiles, slowly nodding once. By 4, a woman in a city polo arrived with a clipboard. Health, she said. I showed her the sinks, thermometers, sanitizer strips pinking on cue. She checked boxes in a steady rhythm. At the back door, she pressed a finger to the gasket and frowned. Weather strips tired. Replace it before storm season. If it gaps, it's a minor citation. How long? I asked. 72 hours, she said. Fix it. Send a photo. You're in good shape otherwise. She left a yellow copy that felt like homework with a clock. That evening, Naomi emailed more photos. Doe like moons, marigolds angling toward light. I posted the wall with a caption, "Leave a little good behind." A teenager stuck up 3 cards that read simply, "For later." A man with anchor tattoos bought a row and didn't leave a name. A grandmother brought her grandson to buy kindness-like stamps. He asked if the cards melt in rain. "Only the ink," I said, "and we'll rewrite it." He grinned and wrote one, "For the mail carrier." At midnight, the dough for Bay and Vine rose like a quiet vote. I set alarms and dozed on the love seat. At 4:30, the street was a soft exhale. The mixer took on morning. Theo showed with a wagon and headlamp. We loaded bread. At the restaurant's back door, Marcus checked temps and said, "Let's write up a standing order." On the walk back, air tasted softly like peaches. Heat lightning stitched the river. I taped the notice, added a second sheet. Offshore, something built. Inside, so did I. The first thunder was a rumor stitched over the river. By noon, the rumor had teeth. The Chronicle push alert said, "Coastal Storm Watch." I taped plastic over the back window, moved flour to higher shelves, and set the dough schedule to finish earlier. Marcus texted, "If roads flood, cancel, safety beats bread." I replied with a thumbs up and doubled the proofing because habit is half courage and half denial. By 1, rain drew diagonal lines across Bull Street. The pay it forward wall sprouted cards that said hot drink for the soaked, hand pie for whoever forgot an umbrella, and one from the anchor tattoo man, for the crew still working. At 2, the lights flickered, corrected themselves, then surrendered. The mixer sighed to a halt. Someone started a line anyway. The room adjusted like shoulders under a heavier coat, and nobody complained. We breathed, counted, kept serving. "We're open on anything that doesn't need heat," I called. We pivoted to cold brew, fruit, rye with butter, while it was still soft. Lila showed with a bucket of rain and marigolds somehow dry. Theo arrived carrying battery lamps. Deshaun ducked in, shook like a Labrador, and pinned 2 more cards. Mail carrier, line worker. The inspector's warning about the back door gasket chimed inside my head. I pressed my palm to the weather strip. Wind shouldered the door and found a seam. Water beaded at the threshold. "Add towels," I told myself. The towels darkened, quick as tea. When the knock came, it wasn't the bell. It was Knuckles. I opened to my dad in a damp blazer. He held up a canvas tool bag. "Doors," he said, like an apology he could tighten with a wrench. "We're serving anything that stays cold," I said. "Doors first," he answered. He knelt, tested the hinge, peeled the old strip free in one clean pull. He kept working, voice low enough to be almost private. I should have fixed the other door years ago, the one between us. He measured, cut, pressed the new gasket in. "Close it," he said without looking up. I closed the door. It sealed with a soft, satisfying swallow. The room heard it too, the kind of sound a house makes when it chooses to keep you. He tapped the frame, checked the sweep. "Doors should close when you ask them to." "This one closes," I said. "It just refuses to lock people out." His mouth tilted. "Not all people should be let in. We'll start with the ones who showed up." He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked around. Lila refilling vases, Theo setting lamps, Kim laughing with a stranger over a shared cookie someone else had prepaid. The room was a small ship in a hard rain, but it still felt like harbor. "Power company?" he asked. "On a list," I said. "Way down it." He nodded once, like a stipulation he could live with. "You got ice?" "In the chest." "Keep that case shut. Pretend it's a courtroom and don't open without cause." We stood under the hum that wasn't there. The rain eased to a straight gray. Somewhere, a transformer groaned and changed its mind. Lights ticked once, twice, then held. The espresso machine did its waking dragon noise. The room applauded without meaning to. Dad blinked at the brightness. He set a card on the wall, written in firm, square lawyer letters. "For anyone who did it. Anyway." "Dad." He didn't wait for thanks. He picked up the tool bag and said, "Storm season comes every year." "I'm aware," I said. "Good," he answered. "Write that into your plan." He left, the bell finally being a bell again. I made one cappuccino for me and one for the wall. The first sip tasted like a door closing and a room remembered by its light. The first thunder was a rumor stitched over the river. By noon, the rumor had teeth. The Chronicle push alert said, "Coastal storm, watch." I taped plastic over the back window, moved flour to higher shelves, and set the dough schedule to finish earlier. Marcus texted, "If roads flood, cancel." "Safety beats bread." I replied with a thumbs up and doubled the proofing, because habit is half courage and half denial. By one, rain drew diagonal lines across Bull Street. The pay it forward wall sprouted cards that said, "Hot drink for the soaked," "Hand pie for whoever forgot an umbrella," and one from the anchor tattoo man, "For the crew still working." At 2, the lights flickered, corrected themselves, then surrendered. The mixer sighed to a halt. Someone started a line anyway. The room adjusted like shoulders under a heavier coat, and nobody complained. We breathed, counted, kept serving. "We're open on anything that doesn't need heat," I called. We pivoted to cold brew, fruit, rye, with butter while it was still soft. Lila showed with a bucket of rain and marigolds somehow dry. Theo arrived carrying battery lamps. Deshaun ducked in, shook like a Labrador, and pinned 2 more cards. "Mail carrier, line worker." The inspector's warning about the back door gasket chimed inside my head. I pressed my palm to the weather strip. Wind shouldered the door and found a seam. Water beaded at the threshold. "Add towels," I told myself. The towels darkened, quick as tea. When the bell rang again, it wasn't the bell. It was Knuckles. I opened to my dad in a damp blazer. He held up a canvas tool bag. "Doors," he said, like an apology he could tighten with a wrench. "We're serving anything that stays cold," I said. "Doors first," he answered. He knelt, tested the hinge, peeled the old strip free in one clean pull. "Weather doesn't argue," he said. "It insists." He measured, cut, pressed the new gasket in. "Close it," he said without looking up. I closed the door. It sealed with a soft, satisfying swallow. The towel stopped darkening. He tapped the frame, checked the sweep. "Doors should close when you ask them to." "This one closes," I said. "It just refuses to lock people out." His mouth tilted. "Not all people should be let in. We'll start with the ones who showed up." He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked around. Lila refilling vases, Theo setting lamps, Kim laughing with a stranger over a shared cookie someone else had prepaid. The room was a small ship in a hard rain, but it still felt like harbor. Power company? He asked. On a list, I said. Way down it. He nodded once, like a stipulation he could live with. You got ice? In the chest. Keep that case shut. Pretend it's a courtroom, and don't open without cause. We stood under the hum that wasn't there. The rain eased to a straight gray. Somewhere, a transformer groaned and changed its mind. Lights ticked once, twice, then held. The espresso machine did its waking dragon noise. The room applauded without meaning to. Dad blinked at the brightness. He set a card on the wall written in firm, square lawyer letters. For anyone who did it anyway. Dad! He didn't wait for thanks. He picked up the tool bag and said, Storm season comes every year. I'm aware, I said. Good, he answered. Write that into your plan. He left, the bell finally being a bell again. I made one cappuccino for me and one for the wall. The first sip tasted like a door closing and a room remembered by its light. By the next week, the storm felt like a story we survived on purpose. The pay it forward wall grew a second sheet. Cards overlapped like shingles. Kim pinned for the next night shift. Deshawn bought a row that said, mail carriers don't melt. Naomi's photos kept landing in feeds, light on marigolds, hands in motion, captions that pointed instead of pushing, lines formed that looked like neighbors, not crowds. Marcus's order at Bay and Vine held, then doubled. A chef 2 blocks over called, wanting rolls with a crust that talks back. I learned to sleep in halves, to count backward from dawn without resenting the number. The mixer's groan became a metronome. I wrote standard steps in pencil because improvement is draft by design. Mr. Whitaker stopped in again, less windbreaker and more cardigan. He eyed the headlamp by the back door and almost smiled. About your hours clause, he said, folding a blank form. If extended hours continue, I'm open to amending. Rent escalator, tied to revenue, capped. Landlord for hello. And if a community night brings traffic, that's good for the block. I read it as a treaty. I can live with fair, I said. He nodded. Fair saves phone calls. I sent the health inspector a photo of the new gasket, sealed and proud. She replied with a green check and nice save. I tacked the copy near the prep sink so I'd remember some alarms keep us open, not shut us down. On the last Sunday of the month, we tried something I'd been sketching on receipts, chosen family Sundays. We joined tables, let people reserve by writing names on craft cards. I baked loaves that broke with a soft hush and pans of cinnamon rolls that felt like good news. People brought dishes, greens like someone's grandmother, a peach cobbler that argued for seconds. Introductions sounded like vows, names, streets, reasons they showed up. My mother arrived with 2 hospital board friends, voice set to neutral. She waited while we refilled coffee, then handed me a check for the youth baking class fund. No strings, she said, then added, but receipts help. I laughed. I can do receipts. We stood in a new quiet. I won't let you dictate this place, I said. But you're welcome to be here, she nodded. I'm learning the difference. More than an apology, a draft of one. Richard, Dad, came later and did not bring tools. He bought 2 morning buns and left one on the wall. For the one cleaning up. He didn't manage the moment. At the door, he touched the sweep he'd installed. Still closing? Still opening, I said. His eyes smiled. He left. Brooke texted on Tuesday. Your engagement's wild. If you want help building a community calendar, I'll do it. Only if you want it. She arrived in sneakers and admitted her promotion. Night came with a panic attack between speeches. We show up. Looks great in neon, she said. But in real life, it's messier. We made a calendar with events and breathing room. Grant flew in, spreadsheets, and apology. My model missed the neighborhood variable, he said. Let me rebuild with you as partner, not case. We sat with rye slices and rewired his tabs. He left with fewer answers and better questions. That night, I stood by the window lamps. The bakery looked less like a ship holding out and more like a house with its porch light on. The wall fluttered once in the air conditioning, then settled. I flipped the sign to closed and felt no sting, just a room breathing and keeping my place until morning. 1 year later, the marigolds at the family table didn't need convincing. They stood up on their own, bright as a decision. The window lamps glowed before dusk the way porch lights do when you expect company but don't chase it. We called it an anniversary, but the room behaved like any good morning. Coffee lining up, bread breathing, laughter arriving, coats forgotten on chairs. The Chronicle framed us as a case study, how a corner shop can feed a block and be fed back. Bay and Vine posted our bread schedule like a tide chart. The pay it forward wall had grown into 2 narrow columns, cards layered and rewritten when rain smudged names. Some were jokes, most were small prayers. For the student who stayed, one read. For the nurse who stayed longer, another answered. My family came as guests. No delegation, no folders. Mom arrived with paper cups and 2 board friends who had actual names this time. She asked where to stack the cups and listened to the answer. Dad stood by the back door he had weather-stripped and checked it with a fingertip, a habit he didn't apologize for. Still closing? He asked. Still opening? I said, and set a plate on the counter like a period placed gently at the end of a sentence. Brooke slipped in, wearing sneakers, not a headline. She read the wall and pulled a pen from behind her ear. For the one who almost didn't come, she wrote, then added a small heart. Grant showed up late and empty-handed. He took a stool, watched the line, and said, My model finally needed a neighborhood tab. We clinked water glasses. We didn't debrief the past. We did the dishes. During Chosen Family Sunday, we shoved tables together until strangers had to make room for their elbows and each other. Introductions were messy, which is the correct flavor. A kid asked if he could rename the family placard. You can add to it, I said. He printed in block letters and friends. He underlined it twice, then asked if underlining made it more true. I said it makes it easier to see. Near closing, I took a photo. Not staged, breath. The wall fluttered once in the AC and settled. The light hit the plates the way truth hits. Not harsh, not soft, exactly enough. I wiped the counter and felt the room wipe me back, a small reciprocal blessing. If you've ever had to build your own table, tell me where you set it and who sat down first. If you're between rooms, take this chair until yours arrives. We'll keep a light on. We'll save you a slice. We show up. Right now. Hobbies don't clock in at 3:30 a.m. This room pays rent in receipts and names. This story isn't about bread. It's about what we use to measure a life. Success looked like titles, optics, and calendars, until a storm, a wall of prepaid kindness, and a door that finally sealed reminded everyone that belonging is built by showing up, not showing off. Nora learns that family can be a noun you're born with and a verb you practice. Boundaries don't banish love, they protect it, like weather stripping on a back door. They help a room stay warm enough for real conversation. Generosity scales in small units. 1 prepaid coffee, 1 repaired hinge, 1 neighbor who carries a headlamp at 4 a.m. When the metrics change from applause to presence, from vanity to service, dignity returns, and even the old stories can be rewritten. For a practical life, decide what you'll measure this season, who you serve, how often you show up, which rituals keep you human. Set 1 boundary kindly and keep it. Invest locally, learn 2 new names at the places you frequent. Start a chosen family ritual. A standing meal, a Sunday call, a porch light that goes on at dusk. Leave a small prepaid kindness where someone else will find it. Fix 1 literal leak and 1 emotional one. And when you can't do it perfectly, do it anyway. Because consistency, not spectacle, is what builds a table that lasts. If this speaks to you, tell me 1 person you'll show up for this week, or 1 simple ritual you'll begin. Share this with someone who needs a nudge to measure differently, and subscribe for more stories that honor quiet courage.